Now, let's talk about a few use cases or a few case studies for the enforcer. For example, there is a problem reported that the GP is stuck in connecting state at intermittent times, and that is happening when the enforcer is on. If the administrator turns off the enforcer, there is no issue at all. The GP can connect all the time. But because enforcer is on, the GP has problem in connecting. Now, when the troubleshooting is done and you look at the PAN GPS log and the WFP logs, the WFP filter logs that we discussed in the previous slide, we identified that the enforcer has allowed this IP, which is for SAML authentication, but um, the enforcer has blocked the other all these IPs. Now, as an administrator, let's say you're using a cloud authentication service to for the SAML authentication for GP. So as expected, you would allow the CIE or the cloud authentication service URL. But as we know, SAML, the cloud authentication service is in itself is not IDP. So the end customer would be using, say, either Azure or Okta as a IDP. So once the redirection happens to cloud authentication service, that in turn redirects back to the original IDP, which in this case was Microsoft. Um, so all these IPs, they belong to Microsoft, and those were blocked by the enforcer. And that's where the enforcer was blocking the GlobalProtect connection itself. Um, the resolution there is we do know what are the different URLs which are needed for the Azure IDP to function. One of them is login.microsoftonline.com. So apart from the Palo Alto network domains, which is used for the cloud authentication service, the cloud auth in apps paloaltonetworks.com, the customer had to add the in.apps paloaltonetworks.com, Microsoft Online, and I mean a couple of Microsoft Online domains, which made sure that when the GlobalProtect does the redirection, be it embedded browser or let's say uh, default browser, which was Edge in this case, when the SAML redirection is happening, the enforcer is in play. It's blocking the connection, but it is allowing all the connection to those Microsoft domains, which is needed for the user to successfully authenticate and enter their credentials. So this is one of the primary criteria and most of the enforcer issues that are reported. Enforcer exception is something that needs to be taken care of all the time, and then um, um, to make sure that the user experience is okay. Now let's talk about captive portal with enforcer. So captive portal, as we know, it's a way of define authentication factor in Palo Alto where you define authentication policy. But the captive portal here that we are will be focusing on is a captive portal which is used on public Wi-Fi. The best use case here is airport. So a user is traveling in airport and they need to do some office work. So they turn on the machine, they connect to Wi-Fi, and in almost all the cases, that airport Wi-Fi would require you to authenticate with either let's say cash card, or you need to enter your mobile number and then get an OTP, agree to certain conditions. So that works well most of the time without enforcer. There are some complications when enforcer is involved, because administrator would know what are their IDP domains, what are the domains that the user usually needs to go, which needs to be bypassed from enforcer, in a regular office network. But in an airport or say in a hotel, the administrator wouldn't know what domains that Wi-Fi network might be using. So then there is an additional level of complexity. The way enforcer would work with captive portal is there are certain criterias, and there are certain URLs which are predefined for the GlobalProtect to detect if there is a captive portal in that network or no. The way it works is you start up the machine, the GP is on. Because the enforcer is on, it knows that it needs to block the network access, but the enforcer doesn't block DNS and DHCP traffic. So that allows you to connect to Wi-Fi, to do domain name resolution, to identify what are the network requirements. Then the GP will send by default HTTP request to these three URLs: captive.apple.com, client3.google.com, and it's a Microsoft URL, msft connecttest.com. The assumption is that when the GP is trying to connect to any of these URL, and if there is a captive portal in the network, say if you're on a hotel Wi-Fi or airport Wi-Fi, there will be a redirection, and there will be a reset sent from that captive portal network. And after the reset, there'll be a redirection which will send you to a new page, say airport Wi-Fi page, where you need to log in, enter some details, and then connect to the network. So here, what the important consideration is that there is a captive portal enforcer timeout. That timeout basically works in a way where it uh, it will allow the captive portal traffic from enforcer for the domains which are not excluded from the enforcer as well. So, for example, there are domains which are not excluded from from the enforcer, but they are needed for the captive portal authentication to work. So if we have the timer configured properly, that timer would let the user to do the authentication with captive portal, and then once they are connected to internet, they can the GP can connect and they can continue to work. Some best practices in terms of configuration. So whenever captive portal is, whenever there are use cases where the users would travel and they would need to encounter captive portal, and the requirement of the organization is to use network enforcer, be sure to configure a traffic blocking notification message. Like we saw in that video, a notification message should come up and let the user know that there is a captive portal detected, and that there is network enforcer turned on. You need to you need to connect the GP in order to get that network access. So that lets the user know that yes, there is a action on them that they need to do. Then for known domains, you can always use the FQDN exclusion in the enforcer, which will make sure that your traffic is always allowed. So as we were talking about the notification message, there are few other notification messages. So the first of all, the notification message comes up for the enforcer that you need to connect to the GP to get the network access. Then you can configure a delay, a specific timer for the captive portal notification to come up. Uh, Primarily, we are talking about captive portal exception timeout. So, say for example, by default, it's 60 seconds, and 1 minute might not be good enough time for a user to do all the login and connection to the captive portal. So that should be set to not a very large value, but a fairly large value. Say, for example, the general recommendation is 600 seconds. So at least you allow the user 10 minutes as an exception for the captive portal. So once the captive portal is detected, the GP starts a clock of 10 minutes, and then within that 10-minute time, the user is expected to go to the captive portal login messaging. On the Wi-Fi, uh, try to connect to a website. It will redirect you, enter your details, get authenticated, so that the machine has internet. Once the machine has internet, then there should be no problem, because then the GP would be able to connect. The captive portal exception timeout is configured here. And then you can also define a web page, let's say neverssl.com, which is um, HTTP website or any other website of your choice, which will be used when the captive portal is detected. And then you can define or customize your own traffic blocking message or your captive portal message to make it more organization specific. So as we discussed, the user authentication uh, for the captive portal is something that is sometimes complex, and the users might get confused um, for the captive portal authentication. So what we need to do is it is recommended that you configure a fairly large timeout, not very large, but at least somewhere in the middle. Say let's say 10 minutes, as we discussed. Uh, then, if there are users who are complaining that whenever they are at airport or they're traveling, say in hotel, and whenever there is captive portal, the GP doesn't work as expected, and they try multiple times, reboot multiple times to get connected. In those scenarios, it's always recommended first ask the user what exactly they are doing. Maybe they can do a screen recording whenever they are turning on the machine to understand what is the workflow that they are that they are following. What are the steps that they're doing, which will help the IT admin to understand what exactly are they doing. Is it something on the GP side, on the network side, or on the user side? So in here we can educate the users on end-to-end flow to understand what exactly they should do in these kind of scenarios. For example, let's say a user is at airport. They have captive portal, and their organization has captive portal uh, with the enforcer on. The user turns on the machine, connects to the airport Wi-Fi, and then instantly they see this error message on the GP that the GP is not able to connect because your portal is unreachable. And because that's the case, enforcer has triggered, and they don't have network access, so the user is basically logged out. Now, in this scenario, uh, these are some of the best practices that we can ask the end users to follow, which will make uh, their their communication, their network access easier, and it will help the IT admins to make sure that the users are able to do what they need to do. So, for example, the first step is you connect to the hotel or airport Wi-Fi. After you are connected, the user still needs to do the captive portal authentication. But in the meanwhile, if the GP shows a connection failed error, that because at that time you're connected to Wi-Fi, but you haven't authenticated, that means the machine does not have internet access, and GP is showing you the right message that the network access is not there, and it cannot connect. So user just needs to ignore that for that time. Uh, the expectation is that because the captive portal is there, there should be a detection, and there should be a pop-up that you need to log into access internet. But if that doesn't happen, you can let the user know to manually open a browser and go to one of the website. This is just an example, but you can have your organization specific URL. Uh, Once you are there, once the user tries to go to the site, it will, because captive portal is there, they will receive a reset, it will redirect, and the login page will open. The user then needs to authenticate. If for whatever reason that doesn't happen, just try a different browser. Or let's say the user was doing something else, they were distracted in something else, and then the captive portal, the timer of captive portal has already passed. So the 10 minutes has passed, and now enforcer is blocking everything. So the user cannot do anything. Um, at that moment, the user doesn't really need to restart the machine. What they can do is just refresh their global GP connection, because when they are refreshing it, the timer restarts. The GP again tries to connect. It detects that there is a captive portal, and then again the captive portal timer for enforcer, it restarts. So the 10-minute clock starts all over again. Then the user can follow the same process, go to a browser, um, try to authenticate themselves, enter your details or whatever is needed for the internet access. Once the user has authenticated to the Wi-Fi, then the machine has internet access. Now the machine has internet access, the GP should be able to automatically connect. If, let's say, it has failed multiple times and it is not, the user can either refresh or just click on connect. Because the internet access is already there, there shouldn't be a problem and the GP should be able to connect. Now, if we talk about debugging captive portal, captive portal with enforcer, we are again going back to the same workflow of checking the WFP filter logs for the enforcer, because we need to understand what traffic is being blocked by the GlobalProtect. And that can be done in a way where the user would need admin access, and they can do a WFP capture start, reproduce the issue. So, either refresh the GP, which will restart that process, and then the enforcer is supposedly blocking those connections. Then stop the capture and then collect that trace log. For macOS, most of this information will be in the pan-gps.log. But again, that needs to be, the GP client needs to be changed to dump mode of logging to make sure that the maximum logs are printed out, and then you can view those logs at that time. From the logging messages point of view, the pan GPS logs would show you all the details in terms of when the captive portal was detected and when the enforcer has started blocking the connection. So here, if you see in the pan GP log, even in the debug mode, you would see that enforcer is blocking, that the enforcer has started blocking connection. And then if you have the timestamp of the user's issue, which is why recording is recommended, you would know that enforcer was blocking that connection at the time, and no problem. And the captive portal detection is also logged there. So that's where the administrator needs to make sure that the configuration is refined in a way where they allow the user enough time to authenticate. On a high level, this is the flow of captive portal along with enforcer. We've already discussed that the user tries to connect, and if the captive portal is detected or not detected because captive portal is dependent on HTTP response, 200 response or reset, which, let's say, in some networks might not come. Then they need to manually access the captive portal from the browser, or just do a refresh. Now, key takeaways for the captive portal use case is uh, captive portal and enforcer use case. Enforcer helps the user maintain their security compliance, where they can make sure they force all the users in their network to connect to the GlobalProtect, so that all their traffic goes through the secure network through Prisma Access, where their policies are enforced and the risk of data exfiltration is minimized. Um, the and we discussed how it works, how the enforcer works, how the pan GPS service is used to block the traffic until the GP is connected, and then there are exceptions that you can configure. And for troubleshooting, we need pan GPS, the GP client logs, but in dump mode, and we need WFP rules on Windows. For the captive portal, we just best practices for the user education, so that the user can control how they are connecting to the captive portal, and then get best out of uh, in a they can connect to the network in a remote in a while they are traveling, when the Wi-Fi requires them to log in or authenticate in some way. We'll quickly see some of the use case for captive portal and enforcer. So this is an example where there is a user who is traveling in an airline, and then in flight they are trying to use they have GP with enforcer on. So they're not able to do any purchase in flight because the Wi-Fi is connecting, but they're not able to do the captive portal authentication. Here, the captive portal wasn't showing up, and the end of the day, the problem was that the list of FQDN, which was needed for the exclusion, was not correct. The administrator had already excluded airlinewifi.com, wifiairline.com, and another URL, but they needed to add more URL, uh, which was getting redirected to. So in the packet captures, which was done at the time of the issue, it was identified that when the browser is going to airlinewifi.com, that was redirecting to wi-fi login.airline.com for the actual authentication. And because that was blocked and the exception timeout was not configured, or that was too low, the user couldn't connect. So after adding the correct list of FQDNs for those frequent travelers, the issue was resolved. A similar case where another user was uh, trying to connect to airline Wi-Fi, and they were not able to connect. That was because of the way the captive portal equipment was working. That captive portal vendor was so the expectation is that the GP client tries to send traffic to client3.google.com. It receives a response, and then that redirection causes the captive portal page to open up. But that wasn't happening because there was no redirection coming from server side. And at that point, the GP decided that there is no captive portal, and because there is no captive portal, it would continue to block the traffic. There would be no timeout in there. So in that case, once it was identified that it is specific to that network, um, basically one of the URL from that network for the Wi-Fi was added as an exception in the enforcer list, and then the issue was resolved. Another one is the first use case that we discussed, that the enforcer is on, captive portal timeout is configured, but the user is still not able to connect because what's happening is the GlobalProtect is unable to connect. The captive portal timeout continues, and then the enforcer starts blocking all the connection. This is happening because the captive portal timeout does not start. That does not start because the user does not have SSO enabled, and they do not have the save of user credentials enabled. Because when the GP is not connected, it doesn't have the portal configuration to know that it needs to start the captive portal timeout or any other form of timeout. So what the GP usually does is it will use a cached portal config. But in order for that to be done, it needs a username. It could be the last connected username. So for that, either the SSO should be on. If you're using SAML and SSO is not on, then the save username at least should have been there so that the GP has the last username, and because of the username, it can use the cached config. And from that cached config, it can identify that there is a captive portal exception timeout setting, say for 10 minutes. And then because of that, it can give 10 minutes to the user to authenticate themselves with the captive portal.